Hey, question for you. Do you get nervous because you don't really know what your future career is going to look like? Do you get the question all the time of, hey, what are you going to do after high school? Or do you get the question of, hey, what are you going to college for? What are you going to do with that degree? Same thing for trade school, and same thing for why you might be going to the military. What is your plan, in other words? Look, that was something that was a huge area of concern for me when I was going through the phase of what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do to make money and to have a career and have purpose for? Look, I want to spend this time today telling you about what I did specifically in the ins and outs of my pursuit of a career and what I was able to do that was able to help me significantly minimize the stress and anxiety associated with the lack of understanding I had about my future career trajectory. So here's what happened. When I was between my bachelor's and master's degree, I was at the end of my bachelor's degree, and it was in psychology. And all I had it narrowed down to for my job options in my career was something in the mental health psychology field. And that is not very specific at all, obviously, which is why I had so much nervousness and anxiety about not knowing what I was doing. And so what I did was I started writing down questions about what I was expecting out of a career, and I went and Googled and YouTubed a few jobs within that field that I was considering, and I went through my personal network and that of my parents and found people that had current experience. They currently held jobs in those jobs I was considering pursuing that I had done a little bit of research on and still sounded interesting just from the research I'd done online. And so I went and found those people, called them up and said, hey, do you care if I come spend 20, 30 minutes picking your brain about what you do for work every day and see if it's as interesting to me after I talk to you as it sounds right now based on my online research? And so I did that. I went and found somebody. The first one that I went and talked to was somebody that was a part-time on the side mental health counselor at a private practice. And I went and sat down with them at their office between sessions when they had a cancellation, and I did just that. I asked them, I said, hey, this is what I understand. I gave him the brief description of what I thought his job entailed just based on my online research, and then he spent the next few minutes clarifying what I had learned. Some of the things I was spot on with and some things I was not quite even in the ballpark of. And so he helped me gain an understanding of what the job actually was. And then after that, he talked to me a little bit about what it takes to become him, what it takes to become a private practice mental health counselor. And it was awesome. And at the end of that job, I realized that it didn't sound a lot like what I wanted to do. Semi interesting, but it didn't like jump out at me. I wasn't Twitter pated at the end of that conversation. And so he did tell me about his 9 to 5 job. His main job was being a drug treatment therapist, a DTS, they call it, at a federal prison. And so he invited me to come shadow him at his job at the federal prison, where I did follow up on that. I went to his work and sat down with him in his office at the beginning of the workday, asked him some more questions. I did another informational interview about that job, learned what the work culture was like from those questions, the scheduling, retirement, ins and outs of it. And then we proceeded with the job shadow, where I went in and got to go amongst the inmates, where they had a little meeting update about their own hometowns and stuff like that. And then he let me come in and sit down with the inmates, and they did a substance abuse group therapy session. That was super interesting, and it was awesome. He gave me a tour around the prison. It was good stuff, and that job was super interesting to me throughout and at the end of that job shadow and informational interview. So that went on my list of jobs to highly consider. But I realized at the end of that thing, as I was driving home, I was like, well, shoot, that was super enlightening. Like, all of the career exploration and job searching and researching that I had done prior to this informational interview and job shadow thing was a much slower process. I realized how quickly I was able to gain what felt like valid information and clarity about a potential option for me to consider by doing this informational interview thing. So I'm like, I'm going to keep doing these in this field that I'm considering. And so I went and proceeded to make more of a list of more jobs that sounded interesting from online research. Did same thing again. I went and found people in my network and that I knew that had those jobs, called them up, said, hey, I got some questions about potentially pursuing your profession. Do you care if I come pick your brain about it? And so I went and talked to a full-time mental health private practice counselor. Realized that probably wasn't going to be it for me. Went and found a school psychologist, and that one was super interesting. They go around to schools and do testing with kids that people believe, the teachers and parents believe, might need special education services, and they do testing with them to determine the need for that or not. And after my informational interview with this gentleman and his wife about that job, I was super interested in it. It sounded awesome. And so I left that job excited, or I left that interview excited, and I went home and I made more questions to ask more, to get more clarity on it. And I went back a week later or so and to this gentleman's house and I started asking the questions, and he at one point said, hey, would you like to see an evaluation that we do, one of the write-ups that we do after we do a psych evaluation with the student? I said, sure. And so he brings out this stack of papers, and I remember very clearly him rounding the corner from where I was sitting on his couch in his living room. I could see down the hallway in his house, and he comes out of his office down the hallway, and I see him holding this thick stack of papers, and I'm like, oh. I remember unintentionally making this concerned look on my face, and he hands me this stack of papers, and the first thing I do is like see if there's just one staple, if there's multiple, to see if this is one thick pack, and sure enough it is. And the first thing I ask is this for one evaluation? He said, it sure is. He said, we do all of this summarizing and create graphs and write up evaluations on what we determine this kid does or doesn't need, and we give this to the parents and to the school. And I remember being completely and immediately turned off about the idea of making that my career. That much documentation and paperwork just was such a turnoff to me. And call it childish, but I didn't think that was going to be me one day. And so I was super nice about it, obviously. And I continued to really think through this afterwards, but I more or less, once I saw that and realized how much paperwork that was, said, thank you very much. I appreciate you telling me about your job. Have a good day, more or less. And so I remember getting in my truck in front of this guy's house in their driveway still, and before I'd even pulled out, I got on my notepad and wrote down the question that I wanted to ask for future informational interviews. How much paperwork do you do? Because obviously that was something that was, I did not want to be a regular part of my day-to-day job. So I learned that through informational interviews, not only do you need to clarify what the responsibilities are, what you're actually doing in terms of what the company that hires you for the job expects of you, you also need to ask what aspects of the job are like job descriptors, or like what, and for things like how much paperwork do you do. And what I like to call these are work preferences. I learned that my work preferences are part of the company's culture, and they help you just learn and describe the situation and the environment that will allow you to operate and function the best in, allow you to perform the best in. And so I started making questions about not only how much paperwork they have to do, but I started evaluating, like, okay, do I prefer to work inside or outside, and what percentage of each if I want both? Do I want a social or an isolated work environment? How much do I do or do I not want to talk to people throughout my work? When I get tasked with something at work, do I want to work in a team environment, or do I want to work solo for most? And it was things like that that I label as work preferences that I started making questions for, to again gain just more and more clarity about the options that I was considering pursuing. And I realized I also continued to go on and interview academic advisors at the junior college in my town, and high school counselors. And after interviewing all these people, also got a list of recommended qualifications to pursue for the jobs I was considering, and I mixed and matched those qualifications into a path of pursuit for me to decide on to take that would make me the most competitive yet diversely qualified applicant for my top 3 jobs that I wanted to pursue. And I did just that, and it made pursuing my master's degree a lot more relieving and relaxed and stress-free, because again, I had done the research through informational interviews to know what I was getting myself into. I knew a lot more than most what to expect. I knew almost as much as you could expect out of a job without doing the job as humanly possible. And that brought all the clarity in the world to me. And my wife was grateful for that because of the lack of stress throughout college. And as I continue on to get my master's, I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I was doing it for. And I knew what the direction my life was going to look like. I'm a huge planner, obviously, with my creation of this career kindling program, and I was able to start planning out what my top 3 jobs I was considering that my education was going to grant me the opportunity to work in. And I was able to plan out what age I was going to retire, and all the ins and outs, and my weird planning brain was wanting to start planning out. And so it was awesome. The clarity it brought me, as I said it multiple times now, was super well worth the time and energy it took to do the background research online, find people through networking, and sit down and just pick their brain in casual conversation and what I call informational interviews to clarify my interest and learn what my options were and how to become a competitively qualified applicant in the future. So this is the thing that is the core foundation of my career kindling program. If you haven't already looked through more of my channel and my content or my online courses, please begin to do so. Informational interviews will help you with alleviating the stress and anxiety around not knowing what the heck you're going to do for work in your career and how to support yourself and a future family maybe. And please go do informational interviews. I hope this helps. Have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.